The first time Nathan Blackwell walked into my life, he carried nothing but a second-hand briefcase and an almost dangerous amount of ambition. I should have recognized that kind of fire for what it was, a hunger that could never be satisfied. But at 20, love had a way of turning hunger into passion, sharp edges into charm. He wasn't like the polished boys I had grown up around, the heirs of old families with their easy arrogance and tailored suits. Nathan came from nothing. His father had worked odd jobs until his back gave out, and his mother cleaned offices at night. He didn't hide that fact, he wore it like a badge of honor, a weapon against anyone who dared to look down on him. And maybe that was what drew me in. My parents hated him. "Elena," my mother had said in that careful voice of hers, "you're throwing yourself away. A Hayes doesn't marry into desperation. You'll be the one paying for his dreams while he climbs over you to get to the top." I remember gripping Nathan's hand under the dinner table, his thumb brushing across my knuckles as if to say don't let go. I had looked my mother straight in the eye and told her, "Then I'll pay. Gladly. Because he's worth it." I believed it. With all my heart I believed it. So I walked away from the glittering life my family offered, the easy job at my uncle's firm, the penthouse apartment my parents had wanted to gift me, the endless security of money that came without effort. Instead, I took up jobs no Hayes' daughter was ever supposed to take. By day, I worked as a receptionist in a law office, answering phones with a smile that barely hid my exhaustion. At night, I waited tables at a small restaurant, the kind where grease clung to your clothes no matter how many times you washed them. There were nights I came home so tired I collapsed on the bed in my work uniform, shoes still on. But when Nathan looked at me with those determined eyes talking about case law and the professors who said he was brilliant, it all felt worth it. To help with his tuition, I sold the pearl necklace my grandmother had left me. I told myself jewelry could be replaced but dreams couldn't. When rent was due and Nathan's part-time tutoring couldn't cover the shortfall, I quietly pawned a family heirloom watch. He never knew. I didn't want him to feel guilty, or worse to think I doubted him. Because I didn't. Not then. There were moments that made the sacrifices feel like destiny. Like the time I woke up at 3 a.m. to find him asleep at the desk, textbooks scattered around him, a pen still clutched in his hand. I draped a blanket over his shoulders, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead, and whispered to the dark, "One day you'll be great. And I'll be proud to have been here from the start." Or the nights he would take my hand and spin me around our cramped apartment kitchen, humming tunelessly as if we were dancing in a grand ballroom. "Someday," he'd say, his eyes blazing, "I'll give you the world, Elena. Not just dinners in fancy restaurants but our names on the guest list. Not just second-hand suits but custom-tailored ones. You'll see." And I'd laugh because I didn't need the world. All I wanted was him. Looking back, I wonder if that was where I made my first mistake. Believing that loving someone enough could fill the spaces where money and ambition carved holes. But at the time I thought I was lucky. I thought I was building something that mattered. The years passed and Nathan graduated top of his class. I sat in the audience, my palms stinging from clapping too hard, tears blurring my vision as he walked across the stage in his black robe. When he spotted me, he lifted his diploma like a trophy, and for a fleeting second I felt it. The certainty that every sleepless night, every dollar I'd scraped together, every sacrifice I'd made had been worth it. After the ceremony, he pulled me into his arms and kissed me hard enough to make me forget the disapproving eyes of my parents, who had come only out of obligation. "We made it," he whispered against my hair. "You and me, Elena. Against the world." A year later we stood in a small church with peeling paint, exchanging vows before a handful of friends. My family didn't attend. My dress was simple, bought second-hand and altered to fit. The ring on my finger wasn't the sparkling diamond girls dreamed about. It was modest, almost plain. But when Nathan slid it onto my hand, looking at me like I was the only person who had ever believed in him, it felt priceless. "I promise," he said softly, just for me, "that I'll make all of this worth it." And I, foolish and blinded by love, believed him. That night, in our tiny rented apartment, I lay awake long after he'd fallen asleep beside me. The city outside was noisy, horns, sirens, the hum of late-night traffic. But none of it mattered. I stared at the ring on my hand and whispered to myself, "This is forever. This is the love I chose." I had no idea then that the very love I thought would save me would one day become the knife in my back. If the early years of our marriage had been painted in shades of sacrifice and hope, The next years began to dull into something stranger. A canvas where my colors faded while Nathan's grew bolder, darker. At first I didn't see it. Love has a way of blinding you, of making excuses sound like truths if you repeat them often enough. Nathan had started at a mid-tier law firm, working long hours but returning to me with stories that still carried laughter. "Someday, Elena," he would say, loosening his tie, "we'll sit across from partners and not need to flinch." I'd smile, pour him tea and rub the tension from his shoulders, believing every word. But slowly the stories stopped being ours. They became guarded. Half-finished. His late nights stretched into mornings, and when he did come home he smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. "New client," he'd say, brushing past me toward the shower. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. Then came the criticism. "You don't understand the pressures I'm under," he snapped one night when I asked if he could take a weekend off. "You've never had to build something from the ground up." The words hit like a slap. I had been there when he had nothing. Had worked 2 jobs so he could study, had sold my grandmother's necklace for his tuition, had eaten noodles 3 nights in a row so he could have textbooks. But I swallowed the protest. He was tired, I told myself. Stress makes people cruel. Arya became a constant presence. At first it felt harmless. She'd been my friend long before Nathan, after all. She was the one who used to borrow my notes in literature class, the one who sat with me through heartbreaks and silly crushes. But now she was always there. Dropping off lunch at his office. Bringing him files when he was too busy. Laughing a little too softly at his dry humor, standing a little too close when they spoke. Once I walked into his office with coffee and found her sitting at his desk, her head bent close to his as they whispered over a contract. The way she looked up at me, not guilty, not surprised, but triumphant, chilled me. "Elena," Nathan said smoothly, "Arya's just helping with some research." Arya smiled, her eyes glinting. Anything to help Nathan succeed. We both want the best for him, don't we? I forced a smile. Of course. But something inside me twisted. Vivian too never wasted a chance to remind me of my place. "You've done your duty," she said during a family dinner, swirling her wine. "You got Nathan through school, you kept the house, you've supported. But don't you think it's time to let him aim higher?" I set my fork down carefully. "Higher than what?" She tilted her head the way a predator studies its prey. "Than a wife who clings too tightly. Ambitious men don't need anchors, Elena. They need wings." Nathan didn't defend me. He just shifted uncomfortably, sipping his drink as if silence could erase the insult. I told myself later that he hadn't wanted to argue with his sister. But deep down I felt the truth. He hadn't wanted to argue for me. The distance between us grew in increments. First it was small things. Him coming home later, forgetting anniversaries, brushing off my attempts at conversation with distracted hums. Then it was larger. A new watch gleaming on his wrist, though we hadn't discussed buying one. Expensive suits that I knew we couldn't afford on his salary. Business trips that stretched without explanation. When I asked, he always had an answer. A gift from a client. An opportunity one couldn't pass up. "Don't worry, Elena. You wouldn't understand the details. That last one cut deepest. You wouldn't understand." As if the years of sacrifice had bought me nothing but ignorance. And yet I stayed quiet. Because I loved him. Because I had built my life around him. Because every time doubt whispered in my ear, I silenced it with memories of the man who once danced with me in the kitchen at midnight, who kissed my blistered hands after long shifts, who promised me forever with eyes that burned like fire. I told myself stress changes people. That once he found his footing, he'd return to me. But love isn't blind. Not forever. One night after Nathan had gone to meet a client, I couldn't sleep. I found myself scrolling through his social media accounts, though he rarely posted. That was when I saw it. A photo tagged by someone else. Nathan at a bar. Laughing. A glass of wine in his hand. And beside him, her head tilted just so, her arm brushing his, Arya. The caption was innocent enough. A group photo from some networking event. But my eyes caught the details others would miss. The way Nathan leaned slightly toward her, the unguarded smile on his face, the ease of their closeness. That was when the first real crack split through me. I confronted him the next morning, heart pounding. "Were you with Arya last night?" He barely looked up from his coffee. "Yes. She was at the event too." "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd overreact," he said flatly. You've been paranoid lately, Elena. Not everything is about betrayal. Paranoid. The word stung. It made me feel small, unreasonable, foolish. And he said it with such calm authority that I began to wonder if maybe he was right. Maybe I was paranoid. But the seed was planted. Every time he brushed past me, every late-night phone call he ended quickly, every meeting that ran long, my chest tightened. I wanted to believe in us, in the love I had bled for. But love built on sacrifice alone begins to rot when the other stops watering it. And I could feel it, in the silences, in the distance of his eyes when he looked at me. Nathan Blackwell's love was slipping away. Not into the void. Into someone else's waiting hands. The night it all shattered didn't begin with fireworks. It began with silence. Nathan had been coming home later and later, his excuses rehearsed, his affection slipping like water through my fingers. But this night when I entered his study he didn't even bother pretending anymore. Arya was there. She stood behind his desk, her hand on his shoulder like it belonged there. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just looked at me with those sharp, ambitious eyes, and for the first time I understood, I was no longer his wife. I was his obstacle. Elena, he said smoothly as if I had interrupted nothing. Arya and I are discussing company matters. Arya's smile was sweet poison. Yes. Company matters. The way she said it, her voice curling around the words, made my stomach drop. The next week the trap closed. It began with whispers in the office corridors. Strange looks. Colleagues who had once greeted me with respect now turning away. I tried to brush it off until the email arrived. Subject: Financial irregularities in client trust account. My name was all over the report. Withdrawals I had never made. Signatures forged to look like mine. Documents doctored with my login. I ran to Nathan's office, my heart hammering. What is this? I demanded, shoving the report onto his desk. He skimmed it with a practiced frown. It looks bad, Elena. Looks bad? Nathan, this isn't me. You know it isn't. His gaze cut into me, cold as ice. Do I? I felt the ground tilt. You think I would steal from you? From us? Before he could answer, Arya appeared in the doorway holding a folder. Her expression was just right. Concerned, disappointed, sympathetic. I didn't want to believe it either, she said softly. But the evidence. She placed the folder down beside Nathan. More forged papers. More lies dressed up as truth. My breath caught. You did this. Her eyes glittered, unrepentant. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation. Clients withdrew. Colleagues whispered. Even the interns avoided my gaze. By the end of the week, 2 officers came to our apartment with a warrant. Elena Hayes, you are under arrest for embezzlement and fraud, one of them recited as they cuffed my wrists. I turned to Nathan, desperate for him to stop this madness. For him to speak. For him to remember every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar I had given up so he could stand where he was. But he only adjusted his cufflinks and said coldly, "Do what you must, officers. The firm has to protect itself." I stumbled through the flashbulbs of reporters outside, their voices cutting into me like knives. Mrs. Blackwell, did you steal from your husband's firm? Was it greed or revenge? Are you aware your so-called best friend has been covering for you? My parents refused to take my calls. My father's secretary sent a single-line reply. The family cannot be associated with scandal. I was alone. The cell was small, the walls damp and unforgiving. The cot beneath me smelled of rust and despair. I sat there with my head in my hands, replaying everything. The necklace I sold. The nights I worked until dawn. The fellowship I gave up. The life I traded away. For him. For Nathan. And now here I was, stripped of dignity, stripped of love, stripped of everything I thought I had built. That night as the iron door clanged shut, I whispered to myself, I gave you everything. And you gave me ruin. It was the first time I let the truth settle in my bones. The man I loved had destroyed me. And I was only just beginning to understand how far his betrayal would go. The cell was silent except for the sound of dripping water. I sat hunched on the cot, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles burned. I had lost everything, my name, my freedom, my dignity. When the guards dragged me into court weeks later, Nathan didn't even look at me. Arya sat in the front row, her hand resting gently on his arm, her expression painted with false concern. It was in that moment, as the judge's gavel came down, that I realized my story was over. And then it wasn't. The pain was sharp, sudden, like being ripped apart and stitched back together in one breath. I gasped, clutching my chest, the world spinning, and then I opened my eyes. Sunlight streamed through my old bedroom window. Not the apartment I had shared with Nathan. Not the bare cot of the prison cell. My bedroom. The one I hadn't seen in over a decade. I sat up, heart pounding, staring at the familiar posters on the wall, the neat stack of law school prep books I had abandoned for him, the framed photo of my parents smiling beside me at my university graduation. I stumbled to the mirror. The reflection staring back was younger. Softer. Free of the lines grief had carved into my face. I lifted trembling fingers to my cheek. "No," I whispered. "This can't be real." But it was. At breakfast, my mother scolded me gently for staying up too late studying. My father reminded me of the Hayes Fellowship interview next week. My younger brother teased me about still hogging the bathroom. I sat there in stunned silence, my spoon frozen halfway to my mouth. It was real. I had gone back. 10 years. The first thing I felt was disbelief. The second was grief, for the woman I had been, the one who had died alone and betrayed. But the third, burning hotter than anything else, was rage. Rage that Nathan had stolen a decade of my life. Rage that Arya, my so-called best friend, had laughed behind my back as she ruined me. Rage at myself for being so blind. Not this time. That afternoon I sat alone in my room and made a vow. I would not waste this second chance. I would not give Nathan my youth, my money, or my dreams. I would not hand Arya my trust. And I would not let Vivian's poisonous whispers convince me I was unworthy. This time I would live for me. And when the moment came, I would make them all pay. But first I had to undo the damage I had caused in my last life. I went to my parents. For years, I had carried the memory of my father's disappointed gaze, my mother's silence when I chose Nathan over them. It had been one of my deepest regrets, that I had burned the bridge to the people who had loved me most. So I walked into my father's study, my hands shaking, and said, "Dad, I'm sorry." He looked up, startled. "Sorry? For what?" "For everything," I whispered. "For not listening. For turning my back. For not valuing what you tried to give me." His expression softened, the sternness melting into something warmer. "Elena," he said slowly, "you haven't done any of that. Not yet." Tears blurred my vision. He didn't know, couldn't know, that in another life I already had. But this time I wouldn't. The fellowship interview loomed in a week. Last time I had thrown it away for Nathan's sake. This time I prepared with a vengeance. Every night I stayed up reading case studies, rehearsing answers, refining my pitch. My mother would peek in with tea, smiling at me like I was the daughter she had always believed I could be. I clung to that smile. It reminded me what I was fighting for. Still, Nathan's shadow lingered. I saw him once on campus handing out flyers for his fledgling big idea. His voice brimming with that reckless charm that had once seduced me. Girls giggled, boys nodded, professors humored him. And for a moment, just a moment, my chest tightened. As I remembered what came after. The nights in our shabby apartment. The way he used to look at me like I was his anchor. The promises whispered against my skin. But then I remembered the cell. The forged documents. His cold eyes as I was dragged away. I walked past without stopping. His voice caught in the air behind me. "Elena? Hey, wait." I didn't. Not this time. Arya was trickier. She still came to me with her soft voice and warm smile, still pretended to be my confidant. "Elena, I heard you have that big interview," she said, squeezing my hand. "Don't stress too much. Even if you don't get it, you've got Nathan. He really believes in you." The venom was hidden and subtle, but I heard it now. I smiled back sweetly, playing the fool. "Thanks, Arya. I'll keep that in mind." Inside, I promised myself, "You won't ruin me this time. I'll ruin you first." That night, I stood before the mirror again, staring into the eyes of the younger me. In my last life, I had been naive, too eager to love, too ready to sacrifice. But this face, though smooth and unlined, now held a fire it had never known before. "This time," I whispered to my reflection, my lips curling into a cold smile, "the ending will be mine." When I saw Nathan again after my rebirth, he was exactly as I remembered him in those early days. Eager, ambitious, burning with dreams too big for his pockets. The difference was me. He looked at me with the same charm that had once melted me, and I smiled back. But this time my smile was calculated. As I knew what he was. And I was ready to let him believe I was still blind. "Elena," he said, jogging to catch up with me on campus. His hair was a little too long, his shirt sleeves rolled up like he was ready to wrestle the world into his hands. "You didn't even stop when I called your name. What's wrong?" I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Oh Nathan, sorry. I was just distracted. You know how I get before big interviews." He grinned. "That fellowship thing? Don't worry, you'll get it. And even if you don't, we'll figure things out together." Once that word had filled me with warmth. Now it made me want to laugh. But instead I touched his arm lightly and said, "I'm glad you think so." From that day forward I played the part one had once lived so earnestly. I listened to his endless ideas, nodding as if each one was brilliant. I asked questions at just the right moments, let admiration flicker in my eyes, and laughed at his bold, reckless promises. Inside, though, I was cataloging everything. His habits, his weaknesses, the way his gaze drifted a little too often when Arya was near. Arya, for her part, slipped into her role again without hesitation. She lingered after study sessions, offered to help Nathan with research, sent him notes with smiley faces drawn in the margins. Once upon a time I had brushed it off as friendship. Now I saw it for what it was, the beginning of betrayal. And I let it happen. Because this time I wasn't going to stop her. This time I wanted her close. Close enough to watch. Close enough to catch. Meanwhile, I began laying the foundations of my new life. At home, I leaned into my parents' guidance instead of pushing it away. I asked my father's opinion on market trends, sat with my mother to review old family connections, and quietly began learning what I had once dismissed as boring business talk. Every conversation, every lesson I tucked away like weapons. Julian, too, drifted back into my orbit. He was cautious at first, unsure of where I stood. But when he saw me walking out of the Hayes building with an armful of research books instead of running to Nathan's side, his smile softened. "You look different," he said one evening over coffee. "Like you've woken up." I stirred my drink slowly. "Maybe I finally have." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Stay awake, Elena. Don't fall asleep in someone else's dream again." His words sank deep into me. To Nathan, though, I was still the same devoted girl who would do anything for him. When he complained about money, I sighed sympathetically. When he ranted about how his professors didn't understand his brilliance, I soothed his pride. "You'll prove them all wrong," I said one night, resting my chin in my hands as I watched him pace. "You really think so?" he asked, his eyes lighting up. "I know so," I replied. And I smiled sweetly, hiding the cold satisfaction that curled in my chest. Because what I really knew was how his story ended. Arya began testing the waters more boldly. One afternoon, she leaned across the library table, her shoulder brushing Nathan's as she pointed at a line in his notebook. "You're so smart," she whispered. I pretended not to notice, turning a page in my book. But I caught the flicker of guilt in Nathan's eyes, quickly masked by pride. Later, when we walked home, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Arya's just being supportive." I looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Of course. He's my best friend. Why would I ever think otherwise? He relaxed instantly, relief flooding his face. I bit back a laugh. Let him believe I was still that gullible girl. It would only make his downfall sweeter. Behind the mask, though, I was building. I poured myself into the fellowship interview, dazzling the panel with answers I hadn't bothered to prepare for last time. I spoke of market potential, international networks, sustainable growth. The words came easily, sharper, stronger, because I wasn't just parroting theory. I was speaking with the bitter knowledge of what not to do. When I walked out of that room, I knew I had nailed it. And when the acceptance letter arrived weeks later, I held it in trembling hands, my chest swelling with pride. This was mine. Not Nathan's. Not Arya's. But I didn't tell Nathan immediately. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. I wanted to see how long it would take him to notice I had my own path. Days passed, then weeks. He never asked. He was too consumed with his own schemes, his late-night calls, his whispered meetings with Arya. And I let him be. Because every step he took away from me was another step into the trap I was quietly weaving. Sometimes, late at night, I'd watch him from across the room as he scribbled notes furiously, his face lit by the glow of his desk lamp. Once that sight had filled me with love. Now I felt nothing but cold calculation. "You think you're playing me again," I whispered under my breath so softly he couldn't hear. "But this time, Nathan, I'm playing you. The sweetest part of revenge isn't the final strike. It's the quiet moments before, when your enemies are still smiling, not knowing the ground beneath them is already cracking." That was the stage I was in now. On the surface, I was still the same Elena, Nathan's doting supporter, Arya's trusting best friend. I laughed in all the right places, played the role of a woman who hadn't learned yet how sharp the world could be. But behind that mask I was already tightening the noose. It began with Arya. She had always carried herself like porcelain, delicate, flawless, untouchable. But I knew from my last life how easily porcelain cracks when pressed. In that life she had whispered to Nathan that she lived only for him, that she had sacrificed everything for love. But I remembered the truth. Her family was drowning in debt. Her father had gambled away their savings, and her mother relied on endless handouts from wealthy friends. Arya had been desperate. She hadn't loved Nathan. She had loved the stability he represented once my sacrifices bore fruit. This time I wouldn't wait for her to latch on. I'd rip off her mask myself. One evening, when she excused herself to take a family call, I followed. Not physically, that would be too obvious. Instead, I had already arranged for someone to be watching. Julian had connections. He didn't ask questions when I requested a discreet investigator, just raised a brow and said, "You're finally done playing defense, aren't you?" "Yes," I said simply. The report came back within days. Photographs of Arya's father stumbling out of a gambling den. Records of overdue loans. A whisper of something darker. That Arya herself had been cozying up to a married businessman in exchange for money to pay off her family's creditors. I sat with the folder open on my desk, a cold smile tugging at my lips. Perfect. The leak had to be subtle. A whisper to the right people, a nudge in the right circles. I dropped an anonymous tip to one of the campus gossip forums, attaching a photo of her father's debts. I sent another to a student journalist hungry for a scoop, hinting at Arya's secret benefactor. By the end of the week, the rumors had started. "Did you hear about Arya's family? I heard she's only with Nathan because she needs money." Typical White Lotus. Pretty face, rotten roots. Arya tried to laugh it off, but I could see the panic in her eyes when she caught her reflection in the window. She wasn't untouchable anymore. Nathan, of course, noticed. He pulled me aside one afternoon, his brow furrowed. "People are saying terrible things about Arya. You don't think any of it's true, do you?" I widened my eyes, feigning surprise. "Of course not. Arya's my best friend. Who would spread something so awful?" He hesitated, studying my face. But I had perfected innocence long ago. Finally he sighed. "You're right. It's just, she's been so stressed lately. I feel bad for her." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. He was already trying to protect her. Already leaning toward her. Exactly as I remembered. Meanwhile, I was strengthening my own position. The fellowship had opened doors to a network of mentors and investors who respected my intellect, not my last name. With Julian's guidance, I navigated meetings I had once avoided, taking notes, asking sharp questions, and building a reputation for myself. Every handshake, every new connection, felt like a brick laid in the fortress I was constructing around my future. This time I wouldn't be defenseless when Nathan struck. This time I'd be the one holding the knife. Arya grew more desperate as the whispers spread. She began clinging to Nathan more openly, her hand lingering on his arm, her gaze filled with exaggerated devotion. One night, at a dinner with friends, she leaned across the table and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Nathan, you're the only one I can rely on. You're the only one who understands me." Her eyes flicked to me, gauging my reaction. I smiled sweetly. "Of course. That's what friends are for." Her face faltered just slightly. Nathan, oblivious, squeezed her hand under the table. I saw it, and I memorized it. But cracks were forming between them too. Because with every whisper of scandal, Nathan's ambitious mind began to calculate. He wanted a perfect partner, someone who elevated him. Not someone weighed down by debt and rumors. And the more Arya tried to cling, the more suffocated he looked. I sat back and watched, sipping my wine, letting them unravel at their own pace. The night it nearly exploded was almost comical. We were at a networking mixer. Arya was clinging to Nathan's side, smiling too brightly, while I drifted between groups collecting business cards. Halfway through the evening, I overheard a group of young associates whispering. "Isn't that the girl whose dad owes money all over town?" I heard Nathan's only keeping her around out of pity. Pity or something else? Arya heard it too. I saw the flash of fury in her eyes, the way her hand tightened painfully around Nathan's arm. "Nathan," she hissed under her breath, "you said you'd protect me from this." He shifted uncomfortably. "Arya, please. Not here." I hid my smirk behind my glass. Perfect. Later that night when Nathan walked me home he seemed distracted. "People are cruel," he muttered. "They see someone vulnerable and they tear her apart. It isn't fair." I tilted my head pretending to think. Maybe she should focus less on appearances and more on substance. Rumors die when there's nothing to feed them. He frowned. "You don't understand." I smiled softly. "Maybe I understand better than you think." His brow furrowed but I turned away before he could press. By then my trap was set. Arya's mask had cracked. Nathan was torn between loyalty and calculation. And I was no longer the naive girl caught in the middle. I was the one pulling the strings. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I whispered into the dark, "This is only the beginning." Because the sweetest part of revenge wasn't just watching them falter. It was knowing they hadn't even realized yet who was holding the knife. The first crack in Nathan's empire came quietly, disguised as coincidence. A contract he'd been boasting about. A partnership with a mid-size firm that was supposed to catapult him into the big leagues. Fell through overnight. The official excuse was budget cuts, but I knew the truth. A whisper placed in the right ear, a reminder of Nathan's shaky ethics, and the deal evaporated before ink touched paper. He raged for days, pacing our tiny office like a caged lion, throwing papers across the desk. "Do you know what this means, Elena? Do you understand how rare that opportunity was?" I kept my expression soft, my voice soothing. "You'll find another, Nathan. You always do." Inside though I savored it. Because I had been the one to strike the first match. From there it was a slow, delicious burn. His clients began questioning him more aggressively. Investors stopped returning calls. A rumor, carefully seeded, that his star project had been built on falsified data began circulating. Each time, Nathan would storm into our apartment, slamming the door, demanding to know who was sabotaging him. "Someone's out to get me," he growled one night, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles whitened. "No one loses this much this fast unless there's a snake in the grass." I lowered my eyes, hiding my smile. If only he knew the snake was already coiled in his bed. Arya meanwhile was unraveling. The whispers about her family's debts had grown louder. At first Nathan defended her. "People just like to tear down those who shine too brightly," he said stubbornly. But the shine was fading. Arya became jumpy, her temper fraying. She clung harder to Nathan in public, but I could see the cracks in private. The way her eyes darted when his back was turned, the way she calculated escape routes even as she swore her devotion. The breaking point came when one of her family's creditors confronted her outside a restaurant, shouting about unpaid loans. Someone caught it on video. Within hours it was online. Suddenly, the pristine, flawless Arya Moore was exposed as a woman drowning in secrets. Nathan's investors began to worry. "Your associations," one of them said delicately, "don't reflect well on your firm." Nathan came home that night, his face pale, his voice sharp. "Do you have any idea what I've risked for Arya? And this is how she repays me? With scandal." I tilted my head innocently. "Maybe people aren't out to get you, Nathan. Maybe they're just seeing the truth." He froze, staring at me like he was trying to hear something hidden beneath my words. But then he shook his head, muttering, No, this is just bad luck. It has to be." I turned away before he could read the satisfaction in my smile. The final blow came swiftly. The Bar Association opened an investigation into Nathan's firm. Fraud, misrepresentation, mishandling client funds. Charges that mirrored the ones he had once framed me with. The irony was exquisite. I hadn't even needed to fabricate much. Just a few nudges, a few documents placed where they would be found, and the truth did the rest. When the notice arrived, Nathan crumpled the letter in his fist, his chest heaving. "They're trying to ruin me. Someone set me up." For the first time I didn't hide my smile. Maybe you set yourself up, Nathan. His eyes snapped to mine, searching, suspicious. But he was too far gone to put the pieces together. Arya abandoned him soon after. She didn't do it with a fight. She did it quietly, slipping away to the arms of a wealthier man who could shield her from scandal. Nathan came home one night to find her gone, her clothes missing from the closet, her perfume no longer lingering in the air. She left me, he whispered, collapsing onto the couch, his hands trembling. After everything, she left me. I watched him break, my heart as cold as steel. She always was good at survival, I said softly. You should have known. His head snapped up, his eyes red and wild. Why do you sound like you knew this would happen? I smiled faintly. Because I did. The investigation ended with brutal efficiency. Nathan's license was revoked. His accounts frozen. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls. One by one, the pillars of his empire crumbled, leaving him exposed, stripped of power, reputation, and wealth. And finally he turned to me. Elena, he said hoarsely, his once proud voice cracked and desperate. You believe me, don't you? You know I'm innocent. You'll stand by me. I looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man I had once sacrificed everything for. The man who had left me to rot in a cell in another life. The man who had chosen Arya over me twice. And now, broken, ruined, he was begging for me. I leaned close, my voice soft and sharp as a blade. You think you've been playing me all this time, Nathan? But it was me. I played you. His face drained of color. For the first time he understood. Too late. I walked away from him that night, his shattered cries echoing behind me. The collapse of Nathan Blackwell was complete. And I was only just beginning to taste my freedom. Nathan Blackwell was nothing but a shadow when he came crawling back to me. His once perfect suits were wrinkled. His confident shoulders had collapsed inward. His eyes, those eyes that once burned with ambition, now looked hollow, desperate, bloodshot from nights without sleep. He stood outside the Hayes building, the very place he had once mocked as privilege dressed in marble, waiting for me like a beggar waits for bread. Elena, he said when I walked out with Julian by my side. His voice cracked on my name. Please. Just a moment. I stopped. Not because I owed him anything, but because part of me wanted to savor this. To look at the ruins of the man who had once ruined me. Julian tensed beside me, but I touched his arm lightly. It's fine. Nathan's eyes flicked to Julian, then back to me, jealousy sparking even through his despair. He doesn't know you like I do, he rasped. He wasn't there when we... I cut him off with a laugh. Oh Nathan. That's where you're wrong. He knows me better than you ever did. Because he sees me. You only ever saw what I could give you. His face crumpled. We stood there, strangers now, in the place where I had once sacrificed everything for him. Elena, I made mistakes, he said, falling to his knees right there on the polished stone steps. People were beginning to stare. But I loved you. I love you. Please give me another chance. I'll change. I'll make it right. Images flashed through my mind like lightning. The cell door slamming shut. His voice in court testifying against me. Arya's smug smile as she slipped her hand into his. My last breath in that first life, abandoned and unloved. And then the fire of my rebirth. I stepped closer, my heels clicking like a judge's gavel. I leaned down until my words cut into him like a blade. You didn't lose me to Arya, Nathan. You lost me to yourself. Twice. He sobbed openly, clutching at the hem of my coat. Don't say that. Don't leave me with nothing. I pulled my coat free, my voice steady as stone. Nothing is all you ever gave me. I just learned how to live without it. Then I turned my back on him. Julian walked with me, silent at first. When we reached the car, he finally spoke. Do you regret it? Any of it? I thought for a long moment. I regret loving someone who didn't deserve me. But I don't regret surviving him. Julian's eyes softened. He didn't try to fill the silence with promises or declarations. He simply offered me his hand. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I took a hand without fear. The months that followed were a rebirth in every sense. My fellowship flourished into a career that earned me not just money but respect. My parents, once distant, now stood proudly beside me at events, introducing me as their daughter with a glow in their eyes. Julian and I moved slowly, no whirlwind romance, no illusions. Just quiet dinners, long walks, laughter that didn't feel heavy. Love not as sacrifice but as choice. Nathan? I heard whispers. He tried to start again but no one would invest. Tried to rebuild but without allies he was a man shouting into the wind. Eventually he disappeared from the city. But I didn't need to follow his story. Because mine was finally my own. One evening, standing at my window overlooking the city lights, I caught my reflection in the glass. Not the naive girl who had once traded her life for a man's dream. Not the broken woman who had died in despair. But me. Lena Hayes. Whole. Strong. Reborn. I touched the glass lightly, meeting my own eyes. This time, I whispered, a smile curving my lips, the story belongs to me. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes I believed it. The